brother said he was homeless until I found his Airbnb listing for our childhood home. I nearly choked on my coffee the moment I recognized the photo on Airbnb. It was just a random Tuesday morning, and I was half awake, scrolling through listings for an upcoming trip I was planning, when I saw a living room that made my heart stop cold. The wallpaper with little blue flowers, the faded plaid sofa, the tall lamp with a wobbly base. There was no mistaking it. This was the house where I grew up, the same old place my parents had left to me and my brother after they passed. But how in the world was it showing up on Airbnb, especially when my brother, Jake, had spent the past month telling me he was basically homeless? I stared at the screen in disbelief, blinking a few times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The listing description was short. Quaint family home, perfect for a weekend escape, complete with half a dozen photos that gave me a weird sense of déjà vu. The scratched hardwood floors, the paint on the stair banister that I'd helped Dad with when I was 14, even the squeaky old rocking chair in the corner. It was all right there for strangers to rent, apparently at a pretty decent nightly rate. And the host's name? Jake R. There was a tiny profile photo in the corner, too blurry to make out properly, but the shape of the head and the hairstyle were suspiciously like my brother's. No question. He was behind this. The same brother, mind you, who called me 2 weeks ago, voice trembling, to say he'd lost his apartment. He said he couldn't keep up with rent after being laid off, that he was crashing on a friend's couch and would soon have to live in his car if things didn't improve. I'd felt so guilty for not checking in on him more often that I immediately offered him some money. He refused at first, sounding humbled and embarrassed, but when I pushed, he caved. A few $100 via PayPal for groceries and a motel, maybe enough to help him land on his feet. I hadn't heard from him much since, so I figured he was still struggling. Homeless, even. Except, apparently, he wasn't. He was hosting guests in the home we'd both inherited. Our childhood place, which, as far as I knew, was basically abandoned and in total disrepair. I refreshed the page, wondering if this was some bizarre mix-up. Maybe someone stole the photos, right? But the more I looked, the more details jumped out at me. Some of the pictures even showed the bedroom upstairs, the one with the sloped ceiling where Jake used to sleep as a teenager. I remembered how he'd plastered band posters on the walls and carved his initials into the windowsill. I felt my stomach churn with confusion and betrayal. What the hell was going on? Without thinking twice, I tried calling him. No answer. I tried again 5 minutes later. Still nothing. So I did the only thing I could think of next. I threw some clothes in a backpack, hopped into my car, and started the 3-hour drive back to our hometown. I live in Lincoln now, moved out right after college. But the house was in a small town in Iowa where we'd grown up. As I drove, my mind spun with every possible explanation. Maybe he wasn't actually living in the house and had just posted it for extra cash. Or maybe he was living there after all. So then why all the sob stories about being on the verge of sleeping in his car? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. If he needed money to fix the place up, I would have helped. But instead, he'd fed me these lies? Jake and I had always been close growing up, only 2 years apart. Our mom used to call us peas in a pod. But once I left for college, we drifted apart a bit. Then when Mom got sick, it was Jake who stuck around to help Dad with everything, while I was 2 states away, caught up in my new life. Our parents passed away within a year of each other not too long ago, and the house came to both of us. For a while, we talked about selling it, but the market was terrible at the time, and neither of us felt emotionally ready to let go. We agreed to just keep it as it was, paying the minimal taxes, letting it sit, figuring we'd decide later if we wanted to fix it up or sell it. I gave him a key. I had a key. We both had the power to do something with it, but I assumed we were leaving it alone. Obviously, that was a giant mistake on my part, because Jake had apparently been running a short-term rental business behind my back. As I neared the old town exit, my memories started flooding in. The corner gas station where we used to buy junk food after school, the high school football stadium on the left, the rundown bowling alley that hadn't changed since the 90s. Everything looked so familiar yet felt distant, like a scene from a movie I hadn't watched in years. My stomach twisted into anxious knots. I had no idea what I was about to find, but I was determined to confront Jake directly. This was too big to tiptoe around. I pulled up to the house in the late afternoon. It looked better maintained than I expected, which only fueled my confusion. The yard had been mowed, and the front porch had a fresh coat of paint on the railing. That alone was shocking, because last time I was here, maybe 2 years back, the porch paint had been peeling like crazy, and the yard was basically a jungle of weeds. I parked my car across the street, noticing a silver SUV in the driveway that I didn't recognize. 2 other cars were parked on the curb. Could those be guests' cars? Just standing on the sidewalk gave me a bittersweet wave of nostalgia. I remembered riding my bike up and down this street, racing Jake to the big oak tree on the corner. I remembered shyly holding hands with a girl on the same porch swing that used to hang here. That swing was gone now, replaced by a wooden bench that looked cheap and new. I tried the front door and found it locked. I knocked. No one answered. I knocked a second time, louder. Still silence. Did Jake keep a spare key under the mat like we used to? I bent down, lifted the mat, and yep, there it was, half hidden in a plastic holder. So much for security. My heart pounded as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The moment I entered, I smelled fresh paint and that artificial lemony scent of surface cleaner. The living room was right there, exactly like in the Airbnb photos, but tidier than I'd ever seen it when we were kids. The old sofa had new throw pillows. The coffee table was polished. There was even a small welcome sign on the wall that said, "Home Sweet Home." A wave of unreality hit me. It felt like stepping into an alternate version of my childhood. The strangest part was the fact that the house was obviously being used and used well, but I had no idea by whom. I was about to call out Jake's name when a door opened down the hall. A young woman, probably in her mid-20s, stepped out looking startled to see me. She wore sneakers and yoga pants, the typical weekend traveler style. Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing me warily. My brain scrambled. "Hi," I managed. "I'm so sorry. I'm looking for my brother, Jake. He owns this house. Well, partially owns it. And I was just trying to see if he was here." But her expression shifted from nervous to annoyed. "We rented this place on Airbnb. Jake said he wouldn't be stopping by. Is there some kind of emergency?" So there it was, confirmation. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize there were guests," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm his brother, Kevin. I'm sure everything's fine. I just need to talk to him." She gave me a slightly suspicious look. "He left about an hour ago, I think. He said he had errands. You might want to call him?" "I tried," I said, frustration building. No answer. Another voice called from the kitchen, and out came a guy around the same age as the woman, presumably her boyfriend. He glanced between us, looking tense. "Everything okay?" he asked. The woman shrugged. "This is Jake's brother, apparently." I tried not to look as awkward as I felt. "Yeah, sorry for barging in. This is really unexpected. I'll get out of your hair. I'll just wait for him outside, I guess." They both looked relieved at that. The boyfriend nodded. "Cool. No worries, man. House is nice, by the way, so let him know we said thanks." I forced another smile and excused myself, stepping back out onto the porch. My mind was reeling. Jake had actually listed the place, was hosting these random people, and apparently not even staying there himself right now. I retreated to my car, waiting about 45 minutes in the hot sun, occasionally texting or calling Jake with no response. Finally, I saw him pull up in that silver SUV. He got out carrying a bag of groceries and nearly dropped it when he spotted me standing by the curb. "Kevin?" he said, voice tight, like he'd been caught in a crime scene. "What are you doing here?" I took a few steps forward, arms folded. "What am I doing here? That's rich, Jake. Maybe I'm here because I found our house on Airbnb and discovered you've been running a rental behind my back. Or maybe because you told me you were basically homeless. I'm dying to know how both of those things can be true." He looked away, jaw clenched, and let out a sigh. "It's not what you think." "Isn't it?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like you lied to me about having nowhere to live so I'd send you money, all while you're making an income off this house. The house we both own. The house that I thought was sitting empty. Uts." He chewed on his lower lip, shifting from one foot to the other. "Look, can we not do this in front of guests?" he muttered, glancing at the front windows. "Let's go somewhere else to talk." I gestured for him to lead the way. We ended up in his SUV, driving a few blocks to the city park. He parked under a big oak tree, the kind that used to scatter leaves across the playground in the fall, and we sat there in tense silence for a moment. I was so angry I could barely speak. He kept fiddling with the grocery bag, like he didn't know how to start. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why, Jake? Just tell me straight. No BS." He exhaled. "Fine. I lost my apartment a month ago. I really was behind on rent after losing my job. I was staying on a friend's couch for a couple of weeks, and I felt like absolute crap. Meanwhile, this house was just sitting there, rotting away. You never showed any interest in it, and I didn't have the money to fix it up initially. But I scraped together what I could, borrowed from a couple of friends, did some basic repairs, and put it on Airbnb. People started booking it. I could cover property taxes, some of my debts, the utilities. It's actually been a lifesaver." I frowned. "But why not tell me? Why the sob story about being homeless?" He turned to me, eyes flashing. "Because I was homeless, Kev. For a few weeks, I literally had nowhere stable to go. The house wasn't livable until I did some repairs. There was mold in the basement, a leaky roof. It took time and money, but I was determined to make it work. I didn't want to come crawling to you for help, but I needed immediate cash, so I exaggerated my situation. Exaggerated? I repeated, feeling my pulse hammer. You said you had nowhere to sleep but your car. That's not an exaggeration, that's a lie. And you let me send you money, thinking you were desperate. He winced. I was desperate. I appreciate the money you sent. It helped me buy supplies to fix the roof. Once I got a handle on the major issues, I realized I could rent it out. So maybe I lied about the exact details of where I was sleeping. Fine, I'm sorry. But it wasn't like I was partying in some mansion. I rubbed my temples. This was too much to process. So now you've got a functioning Airbnb? He nodded, gaze darting around. It's not huge. I get a few bookings a month. Enough to keep me afloat. And I actually do still crash with a buddy whenever I have guests staying there, because we need every available room to rent out. I earn more that way. I'm basically living out of a bag. So in a weird sense, I'm half homeless. His words sounded defensive, but there was a kernel of truth that softened me. You should have told me, I said quietly. This house isn't just yours, you know. I have a say in it, and you're basically using it for a business venture. A business you never mentioned once. See, I know, he admitted. I figured you'd say no or try to sell it out from under me. Or I thought maybe you'd demand a cut of the money. Or you'd judge me for trying something so risky. Hell, you've always been the responsible one. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. I guess I was resentful. You moved away, got a stable job. Left me here to deal with all the leftover stuff after Mom and Dad died. I was the one who had to clean out the attic, handle the estate paperwork, fix the leaky pipes when they first went bad. I felt like you didn't care about this place. A wave of guilt rolled over me, heavy and suffocating. Sure, I'd helped financially in some small ways, but Jake had indeed handled the brunt of the day-to-day responsibilities. Look, I never wanted you to shoulder that alone, I said, my voice subdued. I honestly thought we were just letting the house sit because neither of us knew what to do with it. If you'd told me you wanted to fix it up, maybe I could have helped pay for repairs or at least shared the workload. He gave a half-hearted laugh. Well, maybe I went about it the wrong way. Yeah, I agreed. Lying about living in your car is definitely the wrong way. He stared at the steering wheel. I messed up. I'm sorry. It just seemed like once I started telling that story, it was easier to let you assume the worst than to admit what I was actually doing. Especially after you gave me the money. I felt too guilty to come clean. So, we sat there for a minute, the tension slowly dissipating. My anger was still there, simmering. But I also felt a stab of pity. Jake looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He clearly wasn't rolling in dough from the Airbnb, especially if he was still couch surfing whenever it was booked. Maybe he truly was in a corner, desperate to make ends meet. Eventually, I said, okay, so you're renting it out to random people. You're making enough to cover your bills. Are you behind on anything else? He hesitated, then admitted, I owe a few grand on a personal loan from a friend. I used that to pay off the credit card I maxed out for the initial repairs. If I can keep the place rented most weekends, I'll catch up in a few months. So, I tried to let that sink in. And what about me? I asked, voice gentler than before. You realize you're using my property too. We're co-owners. He squirmed a bit. I know. And I'm willing to split the profits if that's what you want. I didn't think you cared. I do care, I said softly, surprising myself with the realization that it was true. I care that this is where we grew up, that you're basically running a secret hotel in it, and that you're lying to me. Maybe we can figure out a real plan, something that works for both of us. But you have to stop lying, and you have to be transparent about all the finances. Jake nodded, looking relieved. Yes, definitely. I'll show you everything, the bookings, the income, the expenses. I promise. We talked a bit more, hashed out some details, but I was still on edge. There was a swirl of emotions. Betrayal, guilt, concern, maybe even a weird sense of pride that he had managed to fix up the place. An hour later, we drove back to the house and Jake gave me a quick tour. The guests were out sightseeing by then, so we walked room to room. He pointed out the new paint, the replaced windows, the refinished floors in the dining area. My emotions wavered between annoyance and admiration. He'd done a lot of work. The house looked 10 times better than when I'd last seen it. And that cost money, which he obviously didn't have, so I started to understand why he felt cornered into the scheme. He opened a closet door to show me extra linens and towels neatly stacked. I got a good deal at a clearance sale, he said. Then he gestured to a small shelf filled with board games. People like the homey vibe. They leave nice comments about how it feels like staying in someone's real family home. That's because it was our real family home, I said pointedly, trying not to be too snarky, but I couldn't help it. He looked away sheepishly. Yeah, sorry. While we walked around, we slipped into a sort of uneasy truce. I realized how much love he'd poured into this place. Yes, he'd lied, but the effort he'd made to restore our parents' house was tangible. The floors were polished, the stairs had new carpeting, the walls had been tastefully repainted in neutral tones. He'd replaced old, rusted fixtures in the bathroom. It must have been a massive undertaking, physically and financially. Sitting down on the old couch, with its suspiciously new throw pillows, I asked, "So, how do we move forward, Jake? Because I don't want to sabotage this if it's the only thing keeping you afloat. But I can't just ignore the fact that you pulled this behind my back." He nodded, settling into an armchair across from me. "Yeah, I get it. I was thinking maybe we become partners? You can invest whatever you're comfortable with to finalize some upgrades, so we can rent it out more consistently at a higher price. We'll split the income. You deserve that." I took a long moment to reply. "That's one option," I said carefully. "The other is selling the house altogether and splitting whatever we get. But I don't think you want that." "Or, no, I don't," he said, almost too quickly. "I can't stand the idea of losing the house. Mom and Dad," he paused, swallowing hard. "They loved this place. I feel like if we sell it, we're losing a part of them." A wave of sentiment hit me, thinking about our parents. This house contains so many echoes of them. Dad's voice telling us to turn off the lights, Mom's laughter at the dinner table. Every corner had a memory. Maybe that was why I'd kept my distance. It hurt to see it empty. But now, at least, it wasn't empty anymore. People were enjoying it. That was better than letting it rot. "All right," I said at last. "Let's talk about a partnership. But first, I need to see the numbers and we need a real agreement in writing. And you have to be honest from now on. No more deception." He looked relieved, his shoulders sagging with an exhale. "I swear, no more lies." That night, while the guests were still out, we ordered pizza and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He showed me the Airbnb dashboard. The listing, the calendar, the nightly rates, the messages from guests. He even revealed how many bookings he had lined up for the next 2 months. It was more than I expected. Apparently, people liked the idea of a small-town getaway, especially with summer around the corner. Then he pulled up a spreadsheet with his expenses. The initial repairs, ongoing maintenance, cleaning fees, mortgage-level taxes that he'd been covering, and the debt he still owed. It was a mess, but at least it was all there. I found myself somewhat impressed at the organization, though the numbers were grim. He'd borrowed in so many different places, friends, credit cards, personal loans, that he was juggling multiple minimum payments. But the bookings were steady. And if we spruced up one of the upstairs bathrooms and maybe added some landscaping, we could raise the nightly rate. "It's workable," I concluded, "but you've got to pay off that high-interest stuff first. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in a hole." Jake nodded. "Agreed. I was hoping you'd say that. If you want to chip in for improvements, that would be amazing. But I won't hold it against you if you don't. I know I messed up and lied to you, so," I sighed. "I want to fix this place right. It's our family home, after all. And if we can make a decent side income while we're at it, why not? But here's the deal. Once we're making a profit, we split it fairly after expenses and debt. Also, I want full transparency. You can't hide anything from me going forward." Jake actually smiled then, a genuine grin I hadn't seen in a while. "That's more than fair, man. Thank you. You won't regret it." Still, a weight lingered in my chest. The memory of him telling me he was sleeping in his car. "There's something else," I said. "I need time to trust you again. You played on my sympathy and basically scammed me. Even if your situation was rough, it wasn't right. So don't expect me to be all buddy-buddy right away." His smile faded, replaced by a solemn nod. "I know. I understand. Let me earn back that trust. I'm really sorry." The guests came back around 10, so Jake and I left to avoid an awkward scene. We ended up driving to a cheap motel on the edge of town, where, ironically, he used to say he couldn't afford to stay, and split a room for the night. It was weird sharing a small, dingy motel room with my brother, but it felt almost nostalgic, like we were kids again on a family vacation, though with a lot more tension. Over the next few days, we settled into an odd routine. He insisted on handling the cleaning after the guests checked out, so I helped. We replaced some broken fixtures, touched up paint in the upstairs hallway, and dealt with an electrical issue that caused flickering lights. We also brainstormed ways to decorate the bedrooms to feel more cohesive and welcoming for guests. At times, we argued. My frustration would bubble up at how he handled everything behind my back, and he'd get defensive about how he felt forced into it. But we kept coming back to the basic point that we were in this together now, and we had to make it work. Every so often, I'd catch Jake looking at me with a mixture of gratitude and guilt, like he was surprised I hadn't completely disowned him. And I was surprised at myself, too. Part of me wanted to just blow up at him, walk away and say, handle your own mess. But a stronger part of me realized how lonely he'd been here, how he'd grown desperate enough to conjure such a big lie. We'd lost so much time as brothers, each living in our own bubble, that maybe this was a twisted way of reconnecting. At one point, while we were clearing out the attic, we found an old box of family photos, dusty albums, Polaroids from birthdays, Dad's old camera reels. We took a break and flipped through them. There we were, two little kids in matching pajamas on Christmas morning, or playing catch in the backyard while Mom laughed behind the lens. The nostalgia hit us like a truck. We didn't say much, but I felt Jake's mood shift. He stared at a photo of Dad, looking younger and happier than I remembered, and I saw tears welling up in his eyes. Maybe that was when I finally understood how deeply the house meant to him, how losing it felt like losing our parents all over again. We spent the rest of the day hauling junk out of the attic, discovering random relics of our childhood. Old trophies, broken toys, even some crayon drawings Mom had saved. We laughed over the silly stuff and the tension eased. By dinner time, we'd worked up a massive appetite, so we headed to a local diner for burgers and fries. We talked about everything except the lie, focusing instead on practical plans for the house. It felt good. The next morning, we met with a local contractor about fixing up the second bathroom. We got an estimate that was a bit high, but the contractor was someone Jake knew from high school, so maybe we could negotiate. Then we sat down in a corner booth at the diner again to go over the numbers. Jake opened up about his job hunt. He'd been laid off from a manufacturing plant that downsized, and jobs in this area were scarce. That was part of why he'd latched onto the Airbnb idea so fiercely. He needed income, and aside from the small gig economy stuff he was doing, the house was his best shot. I began to see that behind the lie was a real desperation to survive. After a few days, I decided I needed to get back to Lincoln. I still had my own job responsibilities, and I couldn't stay here indefinitely. But before I left, Jake and I hammered out a basic agreement. I agreed to invest some money for repairs, and in return, I'd get a fair share of the rental income until we both decided on a long-term solution. We even shook on it, old-school style. That night, I slept on the sofa bed in the living room. No paying guests were there. And in the darkness, I thought about how drastically my perception of Jake had changed in just a few days. Sure, I was still angry at him for lying, but I also empathized with his struggles. When I finally headed out, we hugged awkwardly on the porch. I told him I'd be back in a couple of weeks with a check to start that bathroom project, and he promised to keep me updated on everything. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the house, our house, and felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Part of me was worried Jake might slip back into hiding stuff from me, but another part was hopeful that maybe, for the first time in years, we were on the same page. Back in Lincoln, life got busy. I had projects at work, social obligations, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Late at night, I'd sometimes reread the Airbnb listing, scanning the new reviews from guests who praised the comfortable charm and memorable touches of the place. That's what they wrote. They had no idea about the drama behind the scenes. But reading those reviews made me smile. It was working. Jake was actually giving people a nice experience in our childhood home. He texted me updates almost daily now. Just booked a couple for next weekend. Plumber came by to check the upstairs pipes. Ordered new towels. Hope you don't mind. At first, I worried he was spamming me to prove his transparency, but over time, it felt more like he wanted my input. We were finally acting like co-owners. A couple weeks later, I returned with the check to cover half the bathroom remodel. We hired that contractor, set up a timeline. Jake proudly showed me how he'd repainted 2 of the bedrooms and rearranged furniture to create a homier vibe. His face lit up when he talked about the positive comments guests had left. One older couple even wrote that the house gave them a glimpse of a simpler time, reminding them of their own childhood. That got to me. Our home was now a source of warm nostalgia for strangers, and maybe that was okay. Over the following months, we ran into challenges. The bathroom remodel took longer than expected, draining more money than we'd budgeted. Bookings slowed down in the colder months. Jake had some disagreements with one of his lenders about payment schedules. We argued about whether we should raise the nightly rate or invest in more advertising. Sometimes it got heated. Old resentments flared when we were both stressed. But we kept talking, kept working together. We were trying. And that made all the difference. The weirdest part of it all was telling close friends about the situation. Some of my buddies in Lincoln couldn't believe I'd forgiven Jake so easily. "He lied, Kev," they said. "He took your money under false pretenses." I just shrug and say, "Yeah, but he's my brother. What am I going to do, cut him off forever?" Because honestly, seeing him hustle to make this house a success, acknowledging his mistakes, he really was trying. And we only had each other when it came to immediate family. That bond wasn't something I could toss aside. Jake still didn't land a full-time job, but the Airbnb income was enough to keep the lights on, plus a little extra once we got the second bathroom finished. He paid down some debts, and I could see he was less stressed. He stopped couch surfing and moved into one of the spare bedrooms whenever we didn't have guests. On weekends, when the place was fully booked, he'd either crash with a friend or I'd let him stay at my apartment in Lincoln. It wasn't an ideal arrangement, but it beat lying about homelessness. Gradually, we found a fragile rhythm. We'd meet every couple of weeks for an owner check-in. We'd discuss finances, upcoming bookings, any repairs or updates. Sometimes it felt oddly professional, but it worked. We even started talking about the possibility of expanding, maybe turning the small garage into a cozy studio. I caught myself smiling at the idea. Who would have thought we'd become entrepreneurs together in such a backhanded way? One evening, I was in the kitchen with Jake, finishing up painting a new coat on the cabinets, when he turned to me, brush dripping with paint, and said, "You know, Kev, I'm really sorry." I blinked. "For which part?" He chuckled softly. "All of it. Taking advantage of your kindness, lying about living in my car. I just want you to know I appreciate you didn't, call the cops on me or try to force a sale. You could have." Mirror. I paused, setting my brush down. "Trust me, I thought about it. But you're my brother, and also, you were in a tough spot. I guess. I wish I'd been around more, so it never came to that." He swallowed, nodding. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad we got here. The house looks better than ever, and it's kind of fun running this place with you." Yeah, I admitted, smiling. "It is. Well, every time I walk through the old living room now, it was a strange blend of memory and new beginnings. The same walls that heard our childhood laughter and teenage fights were now hosting random families, couples on romantic getaways, traveling business people. And if the reviews were anything to go by, they loved it. It gave them something special, a place that felt real, lived in, full of history. I realized that my own resentment toward the idea of strangers in our home had eased. In a weird way, it was like we were sharing something precious, letting the warmth of our upbringing fill the space for others to enjoy. About 6 months after I first discovered the listing, we got a big booking from a family reunion. 8 people wanting to stay for a full week. That was our largest group yet, and Jake was scrambling to prepare, bringing in extra mattresses, stocking the fridge, coordinating with a local caterer. He was a ball of stress, but also excited. It was the kind of challenge that indicated we were stepping up in the short-term rental game. The family arrived, raved about the house, and left a glowing review, complete with photos of them playing board games in the living room. I saw the pictures and felt a strange surge of pride. By then, Jake had paid off most of his higher interest debts, thanks to consistent bookings. We were actually seeing a modest profit. I started stashing my share in a savings account labeled House Fund, thinking maybe we could do an even bigger renovation down the line. Or, who knows, maybe we'd keep it as is and just enjoy the benefits. Even with my initial anger, I had to admit this was a success. And a part of me was grateful for it, because it brought Jake and me closer than we'd been in years. Once in a while, I'd remember that first moment when I stumbled on the Airbnb listing, the shock and betrayal I felt. It still stung if I dwelled on it. But over time, I realized that moment was also the catalyst for everything else. The improvements, the reconnection, the healing of old wounds. It was almost poetic in its irony. My brother's lie had led me back home. He and I still had our differences, of course. We bickered about what kind of coffee maker to provide for guests, or whether we should allow pets. But those were normal disagreements, not the explosive arguments they might have been if we were still harboring resentment. We'd talk them out, weigh pros and cons, and move forward. And each time we solved a small problem together, I felt a little more assured that we were on solid ground as siblings. Looking back, I'd never recommend that someone go about family business the way Jake did, lying, guilt-tripping, and half living in a place that belongs to both of us without saying a word. It was a messy, hurtful situation, but at least we turned it around. We found a way to make this house a living tribute to our family memories while also forging a path to our future. It was something neither of us could have done alone. I like to think maybe Mom and Dad would be proud in a way, seeing us keep the house alive, working together, turning a corner. So that's the story of how my brother claimed he was homeless while secretly listing our childhood home on Airbnb. The short version is, it sucked, then it got better. The long version is complicated and full of twists. But in the end, we ended up as unexpected business partners and, more importantly, rediscovered what it meant to be brothers. Sometimes the most surprising turns in life come from the biggest betrayals. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you manage to forgive each other and build something stronger than before. Even now, whenever I step into that freshly painted living room and see guests laughing over a card game, I smile to myself, remembering how it all started. A single suspicious photo on Airbnb turned my world upside down and brought me home again.